have good news. This is my ribbling sweater and it is almost done, which means that this week I got to pick out my next major sweater project, which is always a very exciting time in a knitter's life. So I thought it might be fun to share a little bit about my process, like how I go about choosing the next pattern I want to knit. And I'll walk you through how I find the patterns and what considerations and rules I have for myself before I cast on. I'm always curious to hear how other people go about that because I feel like my process isn't the most common. It seems to me that most people are using Pinterest and Instagram quite a lot to find new patterns, which can be a great resource, but somehow that's not really what I'm mostly drawn to. So I'd be curious to hear how you go about this. But I'll just chat with you a little bit while I finish this. I think I'll take you into my Ravelry for a short moment as well. And yeah, let's get started. So I find Ravelry to be a great resource, obviously for buying patterns, because when you buy them there, you can all have them in your Ravelry library. So you have them all in one place, which is nice. But also for just browsing through and looking for patterns to knit. And I think a lot of people don't like using it because it is a bit of an old-timey website maybe. So it is a little bit intimidating and maybe not the most intuitive to use. I found especially with uploading my own patterns there that the process for that is kind of complicated. Like you have to look up a lot of things along the way to figure out what the hell you're supposed to do. So I've heard a couple of times that people keep away from Ravelry or don't like using Ravelry as much because of that. Which I do get it, but I also find it very charming the way it looks somehow. And I figured out like some parts of it, I would say. There's like a whole forum section there that I have no idea what's happening there. It's like a big group chat of people talking about a topic, I guess. But I don't really get what's going on there, so I'm not going to talk about that. If you know about that or are in any Ravelry forums, and know how they work and what to do there, please enlighten me. I think it's very interesting. I've heard people have great success like looking for test knitters there, but it's just been too overwhelming for me too. There's an explanation even. I recently clicked on it again and there's like a whole section explaining how to use it and I still didn't really get it. So that's a bit confusing, I do admit that. So I use Ravelry to find patterns I want to knit next, but I also do pattern roundup videos where I like showcase patterns under a specific topic that, you know, I would like to knit if time was infinite, but it's not. So usually I only end up casting on like one or two from each of those videos, but just showing off cool patterns because I think it's just so fun to browse through Ravelry and find all of these patterns in there. So I'm just gonna show you my search process real quick. Maybe if you're somebody who is a bit like overwhelmed with Ravelry, which is understandable, it can help a little bit. Okay, I've switched out the sweater for my laptop so we can look at Ravelry together. And the first thing that I like to do when I'm looking for a new pattern to cast on is I go to my bundles, which I use to plan out my pattern roundup videos on YouTube. And I already know that there's patterns in there that I like. I already know there's patterns in there that I might want to cast on. So that's the first thing I check. But even if you don't do pattern roundup videos, I think they're pretty great. So you can just put patterns in your favorites and you can sort them into bundles. So I also just throw random stuff into my favorites and never sort it into anything. But at this point, my favorites section has become like overwhelmed with patterns. There's so much stuff in there. So I find it quite difficult to search through that. I also know that people use the queue feature a lot, so they will use the favorites more as a like on any other platform really, and then use the queue to put in patterns that they want to cast on next, which I guess is the more reasonable way to do it compared to what I do, but I don't know, I've never really used the queue thing because I want to knit so many things, so I just would put everything into my queue. So I find this bundle thing really practical to sort everything, so I can just, you know, click on a random bundle, I give them like a nice thumbnail and everything, and I can look if there's anything in there I would like to knit next. And if I can't really find anything there, or maybe in this case for the project that I chose this week, I already had yarn at home and I didn't really immediately find something that would fit. Where I mostly look and where I mostly make these bundles is in advanced search and patterns. And here you can use the filters and the sort by feature. And that is how I find most of the cool things that I find on Ravelry. So I usually sort something by category. I find it, even if there's like multiple categories that can go into a singular bundle, like when I make a gift knitting bundle, for example, I find it a bit easier to sort everything by category and then switch category when I'm done with one, because there's so many patterns, so it's really overwhelming to look at like 7,000 different things. So if I can only look at socks or only look at sweaters, I find it a bit mentally easier to process. So I'll just, for the sake of this video, sort by pullovers, which would just be sweaters. And then I find it a bit easier already to compare what do I like, what do I not like, what do I like better than something else. And then I don't really use the notebook section. I mean, you can look for what's in your favorites, but I would just personally go to my favorites instead of using this feature here. I found that literally everything has a photo, like most by far patterns have a photo, so I don't use that either. I don't mind paying for a pattern either. I will specify what craft I'm doing, because especially when I'm looking for lace patterns, I have so many crochet items in there, and then I get like super excited to cast something on, and then I realize it's crochet, which I can also do, but usually I do way less, so I'm not normally looking for that. And then the attributes section here is where it actually gets interesting, and you can specify a little bit more what you're looking for. And this is also the most confusing part by far. I find that the way that these options are sorted into folders isn't always the most reasonable. I've recently had somebody ask me about different construction techniques, like how you would, for example, find a raglan sweater. And you know, your first instinct would be to go to construction, but somehow that's not it. You have to like look in design elements, and then in sleeve, and then somewhere down here it says raglan, here, for example. So I find that very unintuitive. I have to kind of click through everything every time to figure out where something is. Recently I've been looking for like a circular yoke type of filter, and I think I couldn't find it at the moment. I don't know, probably there's one, but I find this section to be a bit weird, honestly. I just click on all the folders until I find what I'm looking for. It's like a lot of work, kind of, but you know, we can make do. And then for the age, size, fit thing, I usually just choose adult. I don't really care who the pattern is meant for, but it makes me sad when I see like a baby sweater that is really cool, and then I want to make it, and then I realize it won't fit me ever. And then for the rest of this, I don't really specify any of this, like the specific yarn that I have, because when I have yarn and I'm looking for a project to do with that yarn, my process is a little bit different, but we'll get into that in a minute or two. Something that I also use a lot is the sort by feature up here. So by default, it's always sorted by hot right now, which just means that this shows you the patterns that have, I think in the last 24 hours, gotten the most clicks, and I think something like comments or favorites and stuff like that might also play into it. I'm not quite sure of the process behind that, but that's just what's going on right now in Ravelry. If I'm like looking for staple items, I guess, I like to sort by most popular too, which is usually pretty similar. Like most of the time you will find very similar patterns in there. That just means the most, you know, engagement, I guess, overall, like over all the time, not just over the last 24 hours. And then something I feel like is very underrated is sorting by new to Ravelry. I don't really use any of the other sorting options. I guess best match only makes sense if you're like searching for a term, which I've used a few times, but not really a ton, because I feel like if you're looking for something that is already in the filters, which most things are, it's easier to filter for it, and I don't really know what else you would be searching for. I think I've searched for Christmas around like Christmas time, and you do get the Christmassy patterns, but obviously not all of them, because not all of them have Christmas in the name. So I don't know, it can be helpful in certain situations, but I don't really find it super helpful. But back to the new to Ravelry function, this is just everything that's been uploaded to Ravelry, but like in order. So the last thing that's ever been uploaded to Ravelry is the first one you see there, and you can scroll down to, I guess, the end of Ravelry if you want to. But I find this a really fun feature to find like new and lesser known designers, because you will find patterns in there that look so cool by somebody who has like 3 likes and you've never heard of before. And I think that's really the fun of it. Of course, you will also, in this category, find a lot of things that don't look quite as cool. You will also find a bunch of like bulk uploads by yarn brands, like Drops is always somewhere in there, as you can see like in the beginning here, the first 2 are Drops, and they will always like upload a whole bunch of patterns at once. So you have to do more scrolling here, definitely, but the hidden gems type of patterns is what I usually find here. For example, I'm just scrolling through here, I see this one, which looks really cool, and then I can click on this designer and see that I mean, I don't know, she seems to be designing for like magazines and stuff, but like she doesn't have a ton of like likes or engagement or anything. I've never heard of this person before, but there's really cool patterns here. And I've also found that when you see a pattern that you like this one for example, even if this is not what you want to knit right now or what is like perfectly fitting within the season or whatever, it does always make sense to click on the designer, because if you like one of their designs, chances are pretty high they have something else that you might also enjoy. At least for me, that's always been the case. So this is one of my favorite ways to just browse through. And now if I've had enough of sweaters, maybe I will just, you know, get rid of the pullover thing and now look for, I don't know what, socks or whatever. But this would be the socks, and now I would just go down through every category I might be interested in, and that like, gives me a good basis to compare everything that I'm seeing. I will say something that I find a bit annoying is that when you put two filters, it will only look for patterns that have both. And I don't know if there's a way to turn that off, or if I'm doing something wrong. If you know, please tell me. Because, for example, color work is something I search for quite often. And then I might be fine with stranded color work, but I might also be fine with intarsia. However, when I filter for that, it will only give me patterns that have both stranded color work and intarsia, instead of giving me patterns that have either stranded color work or intarsia, which I find a bit impractical. Like, I don't know why I would be wanting one project that has both, like why that would be something that I would specifically search for. So I find that a bit impractical. So you would have to like go to stranded and look through everything in stranded, and then go to intarsia and look through everything in there to have seen both of them. So that's a bit weird to me, but I guess. And now I'll like quickly show you what I do when I have yarn at home and I'm looking for a project for that yarn. Obviously there's filters down here for that, so you can kind of like give information about how much yarn you have and what type of yarn you have even, and it will give you patterns that match that. But I've actually found that I like it a bit more to just search for yarns. So the yarn that I had right now was Little OP by Stacks, so you can just search for that and click on it. And then up here you can click on pattern ideas or projects. So in projects you will just see what other people made with this yarn. I always find this a bit like overwhelming. There's just a lot going on, you know, a lot of people are using a yarn like that, so there's like all kinds of different projects. So I prefer pattern ideas. I'm still not quite sure how this works, like what Ravelry looks at when making these suggestions. I feel like it looks at my favorites and just what yarn is suggested in the pattern, even though it will suggest patterns that don't have that specific yarn, but just it might be a match, you know, from the gauge of it. So you can just scroll through here, and then up here you can specify your craft again and have all kinds of categories again. So I would, in this case, because I had a sweater quantity, be looking for pullovers. And then this is actually the first one that shows up here. I don't know if it was the first one when I was looking this week as well. I definitely looked at this one too. But these are all in my favorites, you know. But if you go a bit further down, there will definitely be some that are not in my favorites. Okay, it's definitely looking at my favorites. But yeah, here we are getting into territory of patterns that are not in my favorites. I'm not sure how these are chosen, if they're just the best match for the yarn, or if they match very well with what I favorited and stuff like that. So that's just very practical, I find, when you have yarn at home that you don't know what to do with. To scroll through here. But actually I decided to make this sweater. This has been in my color work pattern roundup, and I love this sweater a lot. It's like more traditional design, which is something I've been wanting to try for a really long time. The pattern is also free, which is great, and I will be making some changes to the color work because of the yarn amounts that I have. I feel kind of, I don't know how I feel about that, I'll say, because it's like, it's a traditional sweater, right? So I kind of feel like I should be knitting it exactly to pattern, but I'm not gonna get extra yarn if I have a sweater quantity at home. So I'll be leaving most of it the same, but making a few small changes to the colorwork design. And other than that, I'm planning to knit it top down instead of bottom up because, well, more fun. It also has a bunch of cool projects that you can scroll through, and I'm very excited for this. It looks like a very fun project. It also, it seems like it will be fast. I don't know if I'm mistaken here, but the pattern is just so short because it's like an older pattern. So for newer patterns, they will usually be a lot more extensive, really like hold your hand through it and tell you every step along the way, while these older patterns, they're just like, yeah, increase like 20 stitches, figure out where they go yourself, figure out what kind of increase to make yourself. And it's very refreshing to read through that because it's like easier for your brain to process what's going on in the pattern in a way. Obviously, you have to have a little bit more experience in knitting to figure out what you're supposed to do there. I mean, either way has its advantages, obviously, but it made me feel like this will be a fast project, which might be a misconception on my part, but we'll see about that. So that's how I pick out a pattern, and now I'll go through some considerations that I think about before I actually cast on, so I can go back to knitting. I thought I'd make more progress on this during this video, but somehow I've been chatting about Ravelry for so long that I've just been on my laptop. So one of my main considerations, and I think most people's main consideration, is the season. I really like when I can wear something once it's finished. So if I'm planning to make a big sweater, I know I will probably need a few weeks for that. Maybe like 2 if I'm really fast and more like 8 if I'm really slow. But I will ideally plan it out in a way where I can finish it so that I can actually put it on. It doesn't always work out for me. I mean, I'm working on 2 like warm sweater projects right now, and I'm planning to cast on another one soon. So well, that's just how it goes sometimes. And with the time frame consideration also comes for me a consideration of what are my other whips at the moment. Obviously, people are very different there. Some people really like to have 12 whips at the same time and work a little bit on each of them. I found that for me, that's really not good for me. I've especially found so over the last few weeks. But for me, I think it's easiest if I have one bigger sweater project that's like more complicated and requires more focus. And the fun of it comes more from figuring it out, and having one smaller accessory type of project where the fun of it comes more from being able to finish it quickly. And then I also like to have a project that I can take with me on the go, so that's usually my accessory project. So if I already have a big sweater project, I'm ideally not gonna cast on a second one, and if I'm already working on an accessory, I'm probably not gonna cast on 7 other ones at the same time. So yeah, I just like to have something more challenging and something more mindless. And then I will like replace them once I get done with one of them. Something that I also like to think about, and something I've been thinking about more recently, like with my recent cast-ons, is do I actually need this finished object? Because I have a bunch of clothes already. I have more clothes than I can realistically wear, especially like sweaters. So like if I'm casting on a sweater, it should at least be something that I can reach for essentially always, just because if it's something that only fits in a very specific circumstance, I probably, you know, have something else already that fits in that circumstance. And if I can't put it on for every day, it's just never gonna get worn. That's kind of what I found in my last like year of knitting, that I made a bunch of projects that I really loved and I really had a ton of fun with in the process, and I really loved the outcome, but still I barely ever reached for them. So that's something I also like to think about. Something else that's important to me is how many adjustments I need to make to it. I adjust pretty much every pattern that I did. I'm trying to remember if there's any pattern I ever made without making adjustments to it. I can't like remember a specific one right now, but usually I'll adjust, you know, something at least. Also for the next sweater I'm gonna cast on, the Icelandic one that I just showed, I already have adjustments in my mind that I will be making to this. I will be making it shorter. I will be knitting the men's size, but probably mixing in the women's size sleeve at least. I'll be knitting it top down. I'll be changing the color work. So this is already quite many adjustments, which means that I will also need more time for the project and to plan out the project, like think it through. Whereas something I can just knit down from a pattern obviously requires less planning, but also just less time along the way, like figuring out how to piece all of the pieces in your mind together with what is already in the pattern. So I like to think about that as well. Did I note down anything else? Oh yeah, swatching. I will always make a swatch. I have always made a swatch as well. I've never been somebody to cast on without swatching, which doesn't make me better than anyone. It just means that I never meet gauge. I will usually make like a handful of swatches as well on a bunch of different needle sizes. I also do find it fun, I will say. So it's kind of nice to me to make a swatch. You can see like a tiny little piece of how your finished garment will turn out, and it heightens my excitement. The only part I don't like is when you block the swatch and then you have to wait for it to dry before you can start. that is not fun, but the making of the swatch is actually quite cool. And I also feel like it makes it easier for me when I cast on the project finally, especially if it's something more complicated that has like structure or lace or anything like that, because I've already like practiced it once. So in the finished object, I will at least have a tiny bit of experience in the pattern already. And I think that was everything that I go through before I cast on a new project. As I said, please let me know what you go through, how you find your inspiration, if you use Ravelry, how you use Ravelry, what other parts of Ravelry you use that I haven't shown to you today. The Q feature, I would be curious how you use that, because I mean, I know that I would just throw things in there and get very overwhelmed. Also the forums, I'm so confused about the forums, please enlighten me. So I'll be sitting here and finishing this sweater, and then I'll be swatching for my next cast on that I'll tell you about very soon on here. So see you next time.